CT, do you think that Jokić sold his layup package for his three-point shot this season? Because the man is shooting 50% from three, like still 30 games into the season.
His three-ball falling this year has been a necessity. I've actually not been a fan of him just spamming post-ups. I like to see him play more perimeter game. And I think there's honestly been more room for him to pass the ball, hit AG in the dunker spot, kick it out to Mike for threes, Jamal for threes. You know what I mean? Like there's other ways in him to attack offensively.
Jalen hits this ridiculous turnaround, fadeaway, corner three. I'm not saying that this performance is going to be replicated. The bench has been bringing it energy-wise. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, why aren't the Nuggets just winning every game now? Well, the starters are struggling.
I've liked the plays that Malone has incorporated for the bench because those to me seem new. You know, Iverson into Spain. I think they honestly should run more Spain. Yeah, the bench offense has been pretty improved over, I think, the past couple of weeks, which has been great to see.
The last time we met on the show was right after Jamal had his game winner versus the Sacramento Kings. And since then, they have played, I believe it is 7 games, and they've gone 5-2. They have wins versus the Pelicans, the Suns. Oh, it's actually 4-3. My bad. The Pelicans, the Suns, and the Pistons, and the Jazz. Yeah. And then losses to the Suns on Christmas Day, the Cavs at home, and the Blazers on the road. That was really annoying. I'm really glad that that game didn't happen before our last show, which was the first game after our last show. I want to talk a little bit about the front court, particularly Jokić and AG. We can have a separate discussion about MPJ. And the reason I want to bring them up is because the first kind of segment of these games with the Blazers and the Pelicans were like particularly bad Jokić and AG games. Jokić was, of course, putting up monster numbers in both of these games. Like you look up and you're like, how did he get 30? Like, what's going on here? But I really thought that in the Blazers game, Jokić and AG were probably like equally responsible for that loss. Everyone talks about the Anthony Simons game-winning layup, like refs let him go right, there was no help, all this stuff. Like I think that was like a whole like team-wide defensive breakdown. You know, they got completely cooked on the glass in that game versus a team that is, I think they're the number 1 offensive rebounding team in the NBA. So that had to be like the number 1 thing on the scouting report for that game. Jokić and AG combined for 6 rebounds, 12 rebounds between them, 6 each. 10 total defensive rebounds in that game. That was just, really not good. You could tell right from the beginning of the game that it was going to be a tough one for AG. He always kind of struggles a little bit in the Jeremy Grant matchup, but Jeremy was like very comfortable against him from like the first possession of that game. The Nuggets ended up allowing 104 points through 3 quarters, and they were on the verge of getting blown out. The only reason they were still in the game at the end is because of like really great energy from the bench, and in particular Jamal and Russ playing with DJ in that 4th quarter to kind of spur what and ultimately ended up being a fake comeback, right? And it was a similar story in the Pelicans game, I feel, where it was less of a bad AG game. Though you didn't really feel him as much on the glass, but Jokić was like his layup touch was probably the worst it's been in this whole stretch, and he's been struggling relative to his standard on layups really all season. CT, do you think that Jokić sold his layup package for his 3-point shot this season? Because the man is shooting 50% from 3. Like still 30 games into the season.
Yeah, I mean,
he's shooting below average for his position at the rim.
Yeah, the rim numbers has definitely been a shocking stat to see, because usually, Jokic's touch is always automatic. I mean, that's what makes him, Jokić is the touch from floater range right around the rim. You could, he's great at sealing guys deep in the paint and just scoring over anyone. But yeah, the touch has not been as good, especially the last 2 years. I think you could chalk that up to a lot of different points. The spacing for sure is probably out there. And I think that's mainly the number 1 reasoning.
through guys more in
Yeah.
the paint.
Yeah, and I
He's
think
not
that's an
kicking out
issue.
as much either,
Right.
like it
Right.
seems intentionally.
Yep. Definitely. And I think there's honestly been more room for him to pass the ball at times
Mhm.
instead of him being aggressive and trying to score. I've actually not been a fan of him just spamming post ups a lot. I like to see him play more perimeter game, especially if his three ball's falling. If his three ball's falling,
Yeah.
he's able to, pump and go, attack closeouts, hit AG in the dunker spot, kick it out to Mike for threes, Jamal for threes. You know what I mean? Like there's other ways in him to attack offensively instead of him just spamming post ups, which I think is obviously like he's great at posting up and scoring and drawing double teams and having defense be in rotation. But I do like him mixing it up where he's able to attack closeouts, play a bit more of a perimeter oriented game, play
Yeah.
more in pick and roll in that aspect. So his three ball falling this year has been a necessity. If his three ball was like last year or in the playoffs, even the Nuggets offense would be extremely
It would be
uh,
in the mud.
problematic in the mud for sure. So his three ball coming back the way it has been, I think, has been a welcome sight. And in the playoffs, he's definitely going to need the three ball to be knocked down like he has been this year. And as we know, I think that was a big problem in the playoffs last year. You know, his three ball abandoning him against
Yeah.
the Wolves. Honestly was a big factor in them losing that series. So if he could
Yeah.
rediscover the three ball for the entirety of the year, and then also, kind of improve his touch a bit, like we said for reasons before, I don't know if that's going to improve just because of the number evening out or because the spacing is still not as optimal as it was with KCP. But I do think that there's reason for optimism at least. I think if AG returns soon, you could have kind of more of a optimally spaced lineup. But even then, I think AG's fit has been a bit more. I don't know if problematic is the word, but a bit more uncertain as we've seen in years past.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, AG shooting 50% from three also this season certainly helps with that. I
Yep.
actually think, honestly, and it's not just the rim numbers, but the floater range numbers are also slightly down from last year and years past. I think the fact that AG spending less time in the dunker spot is actually hurting that because you'd find in the past that Jokic had cleaner angles to the rim because the help defender was like so worried about AG roaming in the
Right.
dunker spot. Now that he's off on the perimeter, and we've got like Russ and CB, like more guys that are not as trusted shooters, playing more minutes in the lineup. Of course, like guys are helping in more for sure. I also do think though that he's missing like a lot of point blank stuff. Like this
He has
Pelicans
been.
game was probably like the worst defense. I was actually surprised when I saw that his percentage is as high as it is at 65% because it felt like he was missing more. But yeah, so I bring that up in the with the Pelicans game with Jok and AG because I think they were really struggling in those. Um was there I have a couple more things to point out with the Pels game, but was there anything from either the Blazers game or the Pelicans game that you wanted to point out with any other players?
I honestly think Jokic in particular was. I don't want to
Yeah.
say to blame, but I did tweet after the Pelicans
I
game,
mean,
I
in the
believe.
Blazers game, like I thought so because the bench really got them back in it.
Yeah.
It was going to be a
No, for sure,
blowout otherwise.
for sure. And I think with Jokic, you know what I mean? Like he bears so much responsibility. And I completely understand it. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of people on the timeline and in my mentions that are like, if I criticize Jokic, they get their backs up. And it's I always say like Jokic he's not an infallible player. Like LeBron has gotten criticized plenty. Steph, especially this year, Steph has gotten criticized plenty. You know what I mean? Like Jokic is not an infallible superstar. And
I
I
mean,
think Matt
heavy is
Moore
the
does a great
crown,
job of
or
saying it.
heavy is
Correct.
the where's the crown? Yeah, that
Yep.
one.
I think Matt Moore he does a great job on Locked On, saying the same thing. Where I think Jokic does bear responsibility, especially in those games in particular, and even in the Cavs game too. Like the body language from Jokic, I think should shouldn't be as visible as what we've seen. Him kind of being mad at certain guys. Um, really like he's really animated as far as like if someone turns the ball. The Suns game in particular was pretty bad with that.
The Christmas Day
With
game,
with
yeah.
the Christmas Day game with his emotions. Um, And I think as a leader of the team, whether that's being the best player, but also probably a vocal leader as well at this point. I think that there's probably room for that, for his attitude not to be as I don't know,
Right. It's
as
like a little
visible, I would
passive
say.
aggressive. Like if you're upset about something, then say it as opposed
Right.
to,
Right. Like pull someone over
kind of
to the
keeping it
side and
bottled
say
up
it.
and then uh playing, passive aggressive ball.
Right. And also too, where you see, him play offensively where he's passive, the defense has been really problematic over the past, I don't know how many weeks. I just think his pick and roll defense has been really poor. Whether that's effort, even getting back in transition as well. So again, I'm not blaming Jokic, but I think that he's shares a piece of the pie as far as some of the losses that have stacked up, especially the ones
Yeah,
like
I
tanking
agree
teams.
with
So,
that. It's
and like
funny
we said
because
too,
oh, go ahead.
go ahead. No, just to the point of attack defense, of course, is to blame too. I'm sure we'll get to that in a later segment, but the point of attack defense has not done him any favors as far as assisting his defensive deficiencies, but also too, I think some of his effort probably could be a bit better. And like I said too, the vocal, the body language could be a bit more positive. I would say when guys are making mistakes. But I get it. I understand his position, but I do think that there's probably some ways in which he can maybe not show that as much as he has this year in particular.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like this has been one of the better seasons for him in terms of body language towards the refs. But then
For the
it
rest, for
feels like
sure.
all that's been sort of transferred into kind of frustration with
Teammates.
teammates. Um, yeah. So actually, since you brought it up, over the stretch in December, the bench has actually been playing a lot better. So it's funny that this is like coinciding. It's like every time there's a one problem solved, or at least mitigated, a new one crops up. And the bench has been playing a lot better this past month. A couple of bad stretches here and there, but like I said, in the Blazers game, they were the ones that got them back in it. I know some people were upset that Malone didn't put the starters in like in time because of course they get back in it and then like they let like another mini run go in. But if they were able to get back in it and it was up to the starters to kind of close that game out and they couldn't do it versus the Blazers. But the bench has otherwise been playing pretty well. Both bench players and like with Jokic and in the non-Jokic minutes, I think DeAndre Jordan's been doing, about as good of a job as you can expect from him. And I mean, I think better than I think anybody expects a 36-year-old DeAndre Jordan. Will, if you could bring up the clip from the Pelicans game of Peyton going to block DeJounte Murray. They end up benching MPJ for Julian, kind of the normal substitution pattern, but MPJ doesn't come back in the game. I think Malone was really focused on trying to make sure that everybody on the floor could attack a closeout more effectively. And really, MPJ was able to do in that particular game. And I think like the Pelicans are just kind of really good closeout defenders. This was a great energy play from Peyton Watson. So Jamal turned the ball over and it was almost a layup for DeJounte, but then Peyton saves it with that block and then gets the rebound and makes the outlet pass to Jamal in transition for that three. That was a huge momentum play. And that's the kind of stuff that we've been getting from the bench over this past month. So all the stuff that you would want to come out of your bench on this team, huge energy play. We've gotten plays like that from the bench, and we can move on to some from a couple of other games. And then I know you have a couple of things you wanted to say about the bench offense. The game against the Phoenix Suns at Denver, not the Christmas Day game, was an excellent bench game. I actually thought in the first half, it was looking dicey there for a second, not because the defense was bad, because the defense actually started off pretty well to start that game. I thought that Kevin Durant was just making Kevin Durant type shots in that first quarter. But the Denver's offense was kind of struggling a little bit, actually. We had a couple of points. If you could pull up the example one from Phoenix kind of allowing Russ to shoot when he was running pick and roll with Jokic. And so this play is just one example of that, where they fully load up here and they force Russ to shoot and they don't let Jokić get deep position or anything. I thought what he should have done here was kicked out to Christian, but he's always looking to set up Jokić. But when they give you this much space, like what do? You shoot, and he obviously wasn't making these shots because it's Russ. When they go in, they're found money. Like it's great, but
Right.
most of the time they don't go in. But that was just another example of the bench having an excellent game. Jalen Pickett was making threes. He was doing a really good job of setting up Julian. He's also been finishing at the rim at like a ridiculous clip this month. He's 77% at the rim for the month of December,
Wow.
which I think is second on the team after MPJ, who's
Mhm.
almost at 80%. So that's also been a godsend. And the reason I bring it up again is just like bench energy plays. Jalen Pickett this is like after the game is like fully blown open. The starters got to sit the entire fourth quarter in this game, by the way. And Jamal was out, which is the reason that Jalen even played in the first place, and why Russ started. Jalen hits this ridiculous turnaround fadeaway corner three off a bailout, opportunity from Trey Alexander. I'm not saying that this performance is going to be replicated. This is just kind of to illustrate that the bench has been bringing it energy
Mhm.
wise, and impact wise with these plays, and the non-Jokic minutes have been a lot better lately. So it's like, well, why aren't the Nuggets just winning every game now? Well, the starters are struggling, right?
Right.
We end up losing AG. Actually, I think it was in the third quarter of the Christmas Day game. Is that right? Versus the
Yeah.
Suns with some calf tightness, and we don't exactly know when he's going to be back, but they don't want to take any risks with re-aggravating the calf strain that he had earlier in the season. That was actually a game where the bench struggled mightily, but so did the starters. It was just, really not good. It was the worst Jamal game of this entire stretch by far, and we're going to talk
Mhm.
about we're going to talk about that later. But outside of that, I think that the bench has just been really, really good. CT, maybe you want to talk about what you've seen from the bench in terms of the offense.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think a lot of it's been a bit more scheme oriented. To be honest with you, with DeAndre in the lineup, as a guy who's a pretty good lob threat. He can pass a little bit as well, but he puts
Mhm.
a lot of pressure on the rim as just a big athlete, and a guy who's just
Yeah,
puts pressure diving to the rim.
roll
So
gravity, like
yep,
it's so valuable
hundred
just to
percent.
like give you proper geometry on offense.
Yep, and that's where Zeke and Dario just don't provide that. Or in Zeke's case is more of a doesn't provide any sort of value on that end. And with Saric, it's more of like his jump shot looks to abandon him as well. And I do think Dario probably should get another shot uh, eventually because they're going to need guys to like fill in the gaps here and there. I don't think Saric should just be shelved for the rest of the year. I think he probably should get another chance eventually, but it's going to have to be conducive to some lineups in that aspect of it. So um, yeah, I think the bench offenses have started to click a little bit more. I like some of the scheme and plays that they've been running. Yeah, so
Oh
this
yeah, I
right
agree.
here, you just have Julian initiating, um, and then you have a couple stagger screens here, and then yeah, it's just Jamal's using like a lot of the middle of the court as well, which is great to see. Um, he starts at the block, comes up, Julian double stagger screen, and then nice lob to DeAndre at the rim. And you see Tyson as well. It's kind of like some dummy action as well. He's clearing out the side, so you open up the whole right side of the floor for that lob. So great draw from Malone there. I think I've honestly been critical of Malone in that aspect. I don't think his scheme with the bench has been good enough. Honestly, I think that plays like that kind of are more tailored to what Jamal and DeAndre can bring to the table, as far as at least having some sort
And
of set,
Julian.
and Julian as well, as sort of having a set scheme as far as like this is what we're running. Let's try to focus on this and then see what we can do. And those two plays in particular, I think were really good. So those are two really good plays. Running Iverson into Spain and running in. I think the first one probably called gut into that as well. So the entree to to run pick and roll with Russ, even despite teams not really guarding Russ at the 3-point line. I've liked the plays that Malone has kind of incorporated for the bench, because those to me seem more new than what we've seen lately.
Mm.
I haven't really seen a lot of Spain being run for the Nuggets a lot. I think they honestly should run more Spain moving forward with MPJ. I think he'd be pretty dynamic in that aspect, and I think you can run Spain with AG as a bench five too. You can run Spain with AG, Jamal, and Mike. I think there's more versatility. I think that's kind of could be used moving forward in bench lineups or non Jokic minutes. I think it's kind of tough to use Spain with Jokic because he's not really like a lob threat, but he's a dynamic roller. So you could use that in some aspects. But yeah, the bench offense has been pretty improved over, I think, the past couple of weeks, which has been great to see. And like I said, tailoring it more to Jamal, running pick and roll, and then also having Julian out there too. And then you could, Mike get some sort of, open looks as well. But I think those have been really good to see in that aspect. But I think teams are starting to actually kind of game plan for Jamal a bit more with the bench. They're hard doubling him in pick and rolls. And I've been
Well,
critical of like
we've been
having
seeing a bit more like with AG out, we've been seeing more minutes of Jamal alone with the bench. Whereas
right,
before, I think we saw more of Jamal and Russ together with Russ
mhm,
on ball, right? So I
right,
think that's another difference
yeah, I
recently.
think for sure. And hard doubling Jamal is problematic when you run pick and roll with DeAndre, because he can't break some of the layers of the short roll. He doesn't have a floater game. He can't put the ball on the deck and attack the rim, and he can't shoot. So I think that's problematic in that aspect. He could pass, but I think when you run it with AG, at least AG can hit a mid-range shot. He can put the ball on the floor. You can run it with Russ as well, because Russ has, his mid-range
Right.
game has not really been that great, but he could, attack the rim, make
Yeah.
plays on the
He's
move.
just a shot.
So yeah, even Watson as well. If you put Watson as that small ball five, or not even a small ball five, just have him as the roller. He's shown a competency to do that. Make plays on the move and finish at the rim, and he's got a pretty good mid range as well. So I think if you run it
Peyton,
more with
another
like different
player who's
options,
finishing over 70% at the rim this month, which is like a very welcome sight for him in particular.
yep, definitely the bench has shown signs of improvement. If all these guys can put it together along with the starters, I think the Nuggets will probably go on a run. But the consistency has definitely been a bit of a problem for them. So
So yeah, you talk about the bench offense. I talked about how the starters have actually struggled offensively this month, and I wasn't really necessarily expecting to see those numbers. Like they have a 107, like the starting lineup of Jamal, Christian, Mike, AG, and Jokic has a 107 offensive rating for the month of December. So
it's
that's
bad.
definitely concerning. But the team is scoring at pretty astronomical rates, particularly with Russ on the floor with Jokic. Like Russ is actually a big part of all of the team's best lineups this month, whether it's Russ in for Christian or Russ in for Jamal. Like those lineups are just cooking. I think a lot of it has to do with pace. Also, like they're just more dynamic with multiple ball handlers on the floor. Like those Russ plus Jamal lineups just tend to do really well. Um, so the offense hasn't really been the issue in this stretch, right? I think we have to talk about the game against the Cleveland Cavaliers because it pretty much exemplifies the main issues recurring that this team has had. So in the game versus the Cavs at home, the final score was 149, 135, 149 to the Cavs, obviously, because it was a loss. That was actually a franchise record for points allowed in regulation, or not franchise record, the ball arena record, because I'm pretty
Mm.
sure the Nuggets of the 80s definitely allowed more points in regulation because they were playing at ridiculous pace, even by today's standards. 80 points allowed in the first half of that game. And the Nuggets were just scoring pretty consistently. It's just whenever they didn't, like Cleveland would come back down and shoot a transition three, and they were all going in, right? But they kept trying to make these runs, particularly in the second half of this game, but they were just incapable of getting stops.
Hmm.
And this has been an issue with the team where I've been mostly paying attention to it in the clutch, where whenever they faced a team with multiple creators in the clutch, that clutch defense was just getting completely shredded. In this game, there was no clutch against the Cavs. Like they kind of blew the game open early and were able to just keep responding as Denver tried to make their run. It was just very easy for Darius and Donovan to break Denver down and generate a lot of open threes. Now, my question to you is, because it was the main discussion after this game, does Denver need to take more threes to compete with these elite offenses?
Yes, I think definitely for sure. Mike, Julian, Jamal, I think it's the same formula as what was being talked about in the preseason as well, with getting up more threes. I think your best shooters have to get up more threes. Julian, Mike, Jamal, even Jokić, I think, has to get a lot of threes up as well. Because I think when Jokić is shooting a lot of threes, his game is more dynamic. Um, he's more, I think, well-rounded as far as teams guarding him in a particular game as well. Like if he hits the first two, teams are guarding him on the three-point line, and he can attack from the perimeter. It opens up the spacing a bit more, where you can run AG and Jamal pick and roll and have a space floor a little bit more. Even though I think teams are not really guarding Christian as much as a KCP would per se. But I do think you can run a little bit of that inverted kind of offense where you have Jokić spacing and have AG and Jamal kind of running that pick and roll. But yeah, I definitely do think the Nuggets have to get up more threes for sure. Due to the math game is what's been talked about a lot. But it's the defense for sure has just been the most problematic part about it. Like you mentioned, teams with multiple creators have been able to take advantage of the Nuggets defense or lack thereof. Christian at the point of attack has been very underwhelming this year, and I don't blame him entirely for the most part because it's his first year starting, and he's kind of gone through the gauntlet of guarding all of the team's top perimeter players, which is a tough ask because a guy who's a 22nd pick in the draft, and you're elevating him into a starting spot after being a bench contributor. And again, like I'm not excusing his play because his defense has been really bad at the point of attack. And again, that kind of seeps into like we see with Jokić, where his defense also doesn't look good because if you don't have good point of attack guys around Jokić, his defense looks worse than what it is. Yeah,
Like,
and it's honestly, you could point that back to the Jazz series back in the bubble, where the Nuggets just had no resistance to the point of attack at all until Gary Harris came back, and then the defense was able to stabilize a little bit. Like I don't know if the Nuggets need to go out and get another defender like a Keon Ellis per se or somebody else that you can throw on
oh
these
my
perimeter
God.
guys, or it could just be like expecting improvement from Christian. Payton, I think, has probably been decently at the point of attack, even though his off ball awareness has been pretty bad this year, I think. And then Russ at the point of attack has been pretty good, I would say. His off ball defense is pretty bad, but his
He's a better
he's been
playmaker,
gambling
I
a
think.
lot.
He's just not very like positionally sound. But
Right.
I'll have another question about maybe the Nuggets should mirror that play style a little bit more given their personnel. But
Mhm.
I agree, he's definitely been like pretty good at the point of attack. Not elite, not necessarily the level that we need at that position, but relative to how it's going for everybody else, like yeah, I'll take how Russ has been going there. Yeah, I agree with you. Like the defense is certainly more concerning to me, but I will say, even though I don't think we need to be shooting as many threes as say the Celtics or even the Cavs, they definitely need to be shooting a bit more just because they're literally dead last in frequency. But even when it came to this game, like it was worse when we played in Cleveland because they missed like 20 shots in the paint in that game. In this
Right.
game, they had a 128 offensive rating against the Cavs, but they gave up a 140 defensive rating.
That's bad.
Cleveland only had 10 turnovers in that game, in a 105 possession game, mind you, and they pass the ball a lot. That team does. We weren't taking anything away though. It was like, well, some teams like OKC, for example, and not to say that we have necessarily the personnel to defend like OKC does, but they allow some of the highest opponent 3-point frequencies in the entire league. They're the number one defense. Part of it's because of how well they protect the paint, but they also force a lot of turnovers. But the Cavs in this game, they went 24 of 48 from three, which you can't necessarily control the number of makes, but 48 attempts, like you're going to
It's a
have
lot.
a hard time winning that game. And they got 50 points in the paint. So the Cavs literally got 122 points on threes and layups, basically.
Mhm.
It wasn't just layups because some of those points in the paint were Jarrett Allen floaters, but Jarrett Allen was very comfortable in this matchup. He always, seems like, wins his minutes versus Jokic, and it's not just on the defensive end; it's the offensive end as well. So that was just, they weren't taking anything away on that end. Like, teams are just very comfortable against them. Would you be scared for the Nuggets to face the Cavs or a team like the Mavericks in a playoff series, assuming they make it there, uh, just because of the amount of perimeter creation those teams have? Like, we've seen how the both Mavs games, honestly, this season have ended up being shootouts at at different points in the game, even in the one where Luca didn't play.
Right. Cavaliers, yes, because they have a lot of perimeter pressure with their guards, and Jokic historically has always struggled with quick guards. Mitchell, I mean, in particular, just look at the Jazz series that he played in. He put up historic numbers in that one series.
Yeah.
If you have a guy like Garland and Levert and all these guys who could, dribble, pass, and shoot as guards, it's just always tough on Jokic. Puts a strain on his level because you got to play at the level a lot more than other series, I would say. So yeah, the Cavs. I don't think the Nuggets have the requisite defensive personnel at this point on the perimeter to be a factor against them. Mavericks, I'm not. I think I'm just low on the Mavericks in general. I just think the Nuggets match up pretty well with them. Having AG for Luca. Christian did not guard
Yeah, we
Kyrie
did
well
play
in that
without.
in
I
the
think we
game.
played both Mavs games without AG so far this season. Is
Yeah,
that right?
I think it is. Yeah, because Watson
Yeah,
started
it
both
was.
games.
Yeah.
Yep, and Watson was able to guard Kyrie pretty well in moments. I think. I just think the Nuggets have more of a chance against the Mavericks because I think Jokic would feast against a Gafford or a Lively, and again, I don't think they really have the requisite defensive personnel to like stop Mike and Jamal. I think for the most part,
Yeah, I
even though I
thought
think
I thought
Najee
losing
Marshall's
Derrick
pretty
Jones
good.
Jr. actually made Jamal's job a little bit easier in that matchup
Yep.
as well.
Definitely. I just think the Mavericks series again. I don't. The Nuggets are a worse team than last year for sure. But I'm not as nervous as I'd say most people are in a series if they go against each other. Even though I think the Mavericks are a really good team, but I think the Cavs pose more problems just because they have more perimeter rim pressure with their guards. And like I said, Jokic against quick guards like that who can really
And
get into the
Mobley's
paint.
like a bigger, better PJ Washington when you think about that
I mean,
too.
Mobley's been insane this year. He's really been insane,
Yeah.
living up to my big board ranking. Him and Cade at 1 and 2. So
Where did you have him? You
um,
had you had him at two. Okay.
yeah, I had him at 2. Yeah, he also feasted against Mike the other night, which was tough to watch. So
Yeah, I think Mobley's just gotten a lot better because that honestly, I think, would have been a fine defensive matchup for MPJ in years past. But I think Mobley has
yep.
definitely taken a step forward. He and Garland, I think, are the reason that the team is that much better than they were
Mhm.
last year. Kenny Atkinson's doing a great job with that team. Just, they're playing with a ton of confidence and playing really connected and together. And I think they talked about this on Locked On, how Jamal in the post game presser for that game was speaking about the Cavs sort of wistfully, like, "Oh, that used to be us." That's them a lot of the nights on offense. Defense, not so much. Playing with a ton of confidence. Kenny Atkinson's doing a good job with them. Anyway, yeah, so the Cavs, that's a very problematic matchup for the Nuggets. Apparently, I mean, honestly, last year it wasn't great either. They got completely blown out, like 40. I think like Jokic was like a minus 42 or something in that game, or it was either that or Jarrett Allen was like a plus 42 in Cleveland last year, and that was with KCP. They were getting completely like eaten alive in pick and roll in that game. And then the game that they played in Denver, I think. Either Donovan or Darius was out, and the other one was severely hobbled because they were facing injuries like throughout the lineup throughout all of last season. So of course the Nuggets like schmacked them because they were a great team last year. But I'm not actually sure what it would look like with the Nuggets trying, because they just don't try against most East teams on the road,
Yeah.
unless you top the conference, and the Cavs were not last year. So I don't even know necessarily that like having KCP would have made that matchup great. Probably would have made it a little bit better. Um, But yeah, I think that Darius Garland is the scariest part of that because of his playmaking. Like he does such a good job of keeping the bigs involved, and that is, a continuous challenge for Jokic defensively. If you are new and not subscribed and still listening at this point, please hit the subscribe button and also hit the like button. Please remember to share with your friends, your family, your frenemies, your arch rivals. Hit the notification bell to receive all of our updates on new episodes, on shorts, etc. Leave us a review. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. We're also on Instagram and TikTok at What's in a Game NBA. All the links for our socials are in the description. We also have our clip channel at What's in a Game NBA Clips. And always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks.